On this episode of Newt's World, President-elect Donald J. Trump has accomplished an incredible achievement, not only winning all 7 swing states in a landslide, but breaking historic precedent. He is only the second president of the United States in history to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. The other was President Grover Cleveland. So, how did President Trump achieve this sweeping victory? Here to provide his post-election analysis on Trump's triumph, I'm really pleased to welcome my guest, John McLaughlin. He is the CEO and partner of McLaughlin and Associates, a national survey, research, and strategic services company. He served as an advisor and pollster for President Donald Trump, and he also has been a major factor in our ability to develop the America's New Majority Project. So I regard John as a very good friend, as well as somebody I admire deeply. John, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Well, it's an honor to be here, and it's been an honor and privilege to work with you. And I always tell people the story in 1994, when Haley Barbour and Bill McCollum had contributed for me to take a national poll to deliver to the House leadership in September of 94. And there we were in Bob Michael's office in the Capitol. And I had a +7 generic Republican vote. And no Republican pollster had ever seen that, and I think in our lifetimes. And we were going through it with you, and you were listening to the results as we were going through them, and I'm thinking, he's watching as his plan came together, and he was finally going to get a majority, and he would be Speaker. And having done the work for the New American Majority Project with you, we saw the results come in Tuesday, and I'm like, it's Newt's plan again going into fruition, because it's a long-term plan. It's a long-term view. But President Trump, he's a historic figure. I mean, truly unique in American politics. He just reaffirmed what he did in 2016, and he just did it better in 2024. He was a much better candidate. He was much more focused. He's principled, and he has a passionate love for the country that he wanted to win this election to get it back on the right track and bring it back to a better future, where he thinks he left it at the end of his first term, and he thought the country was off the rails in the last 4 years. And I think you and I share that view. And it was amazing when you see the results and you think of the issues and the things that you do with the New American Majority Project, that the issues, inflation, immigration, crime, and the groups that came together to form that majority coalition, you've done probably more research than anyone else in the country on that.
Frankly, with your help analytically and your team, I think we were able to identify opportunities which came as an enormous shock to the national news media. I mean, when they started looking at the exit polls, they couldn't believe the groups we were starting to win.
Yes. And when you think about it, I remember working with our team with Brian Larkin and the focus groups and Stu Polk on the surveys, when you wanted to do surveys of Asian voters. And we were talking about getting the different subgroups out, you know, whether it were Filipinos or Chinese, Korean, et cetera. I said, we ended up doing the focus groups, the Indian, Hindu voters. And you were the only one that I knew of that was doing any research on those voters. On the Republican side, anyway. The Democrats don't talk to me.
People like Tulsi Gabbard and Vivek Ramaswamy, you know, we were actually beginning to penetrate into the Hindu community. And we began to penetrate, and then, of course, with J.D. Vance's wife, Usha. Also, I had a sense that probably the most meritocratic people in the American system today are Asians. They're the most committed to their kids studying. They're the most committed to getting ahead by hard work and education. And I just thought the gap between their values and left-wing woke Democrats was going to get to be so big. It was retarded because so many of them live in big cities, and big cities have been historically so Democrat. But they just began to erode, and I think there was a significant difference in this election. When did it hit you that we were probably going to win?
It may seem kind of early on. We did a poll, and it was kind of written about. Somebody passed it on secondhand to Bob Woodward in his book, Peril or whatever. But during impeachment, the second trial impeachment, after Donald Trump had left office and they were impeaching him in the Senate, Jason Miller had me do a survey for President Trump. And we went down to Mar-a-Lago to present it. And he was literally in his office watching the trial on Fox News. And I'm going through the results, and 63% of all Republicans wanted him to run again. It was definitely against the national media narrative. And so I knew it was possible. But then at some point in early 22 after the election, again, the establishment was saying he shouldn't run again and should be DeSantis or somebody else. And we just started rolling through the primary polls where he was building up a lead. And it was a passionate lead, strong lead. Susie Wiles, who ran a brilliant campaign as the manager. When you win, of course, you could say you're brilliant, but she did a brilliant job for the president. And fortunately, we won because it was a good job. But she had me come down in December of 22 and go through a national poll because he was attacking different people, different things, because he likes to fight. Having known him for a long time, if you point him at the right target, he's going to win. He's a good fighter. I had a poll where he was ahead, and he'd been ahead in the national polling that we do monthly, that we publish. And he was ahead in your polls too. But after the surrender of Afghanistan, Trump pulled ahead of Biden in the popular vote because Biden did the one thing that American presidents are not supposed to do, and that's surrender. And he surrendered a whole country. It wasn't a withdrawal. It was a surrender. And that's when Trump passed doing the national popular vote. Inflation was being triggered. They surrendered Afghanistan. And in 2022, after the election, Susie had me go down and meet with him. And I said, you need to wake up every day and hit Joe Biden. Joe Biden has like 6 out of 10 voters are unfavorable to him. They disapprove of the job he's doing. They approve of the job you did as president, but they disapprove of the job that he's doing. We were just starting really the primary season then. And he'd already announced he was running. But I said, if you can beat Joe Biden, you'll win the nomination, and then you can win the election. If you can't beat Joe Biden, they're going to look for somebody else. So there was a level that this thing was very doable, and I was pretty confident that he would do it if he stayed focused, and he really was determined. He really was a better candidate. He was much more message-focused. It was so much better than 2020 when he was president. He was just really focused on getting the country back on the right track. Think of all the times you met with him. One time I remember we called in, you were meeting him with Larry Kudlow and Brooke Rollins. You were having dinner in Manhattan, going over policy. Donald Trump was going on, you were giving him some sort of policy briefing, and Susie was there. And we were on the phone for like a half an hour talking about politics with Nassau County Chairman Joe Cairo. He was really focused on winning the election. It's great to succeed, but boy, there was a confidence we could win if he did the right things.
He's won more electoral votes than he won back in 16, more electoral votes than Joe Biden won. And more importantly, I think, he won an absolute majority of the American people, which I think gives him a psychological advantage in trying to govern the country.
We're looking at the same things where, in advising President Trump in the surveys we had, you had surveys of African Americans. You had focus groups of African Americans. You had surveys of Hispanic voters. You had focus groups of Hispanic voters. And you had lots of surveys where we were looking at women and we were looking at younger voters. And those are the groups that went for him this time, where he made historic progress. When you're looking at the exit polls among the different groups, he got record amounts of African-American voters, Hispanic voters. They said he got 46%. That's higher than George W. Bush got in 2004. They really don't break it down as much, but of Asian voters. So he made progress with young voters. He won suburban women. He got the highest amount ever he got among African-Americans, among Hispanic voters. That created that 51%, because the 51% was not doable without those voters. You know, that's America's becoming more diverse. It's becoming a bigger, more mature country in a lot of ways. It's going to hit 250 years. We'll be coming up on that anniversary soon. He totally changed the Republican Party. It's now the party of working men and women, which is the majority of people in the country. So, and it cuts across all these different voter groups. So he's changed the Republican Party to reflect the majority of the voters in the country. And now on the ballot, he got the 51%. I think that shocked a lot of people. I think it shocked Joe Biden. It shocked Kamala Harris. It shocked a lot of the Democrats.
I think it actually pulled the plug on a lot of people who were prepared to demonstrate if he'd won really narrowly. And all of a sudden they were faced with a majority of Americans disagree with me. That's a pretty big moral burden to then jump up and protest. And I think it really changed qualitatively what's possible in the near future.
And when you look at it, think about when you're watching the results, all of a sudden they stop counting Arizona. It's only half the votes. And all Arizona, they stop at like half. And it took them hours to Nevada. They stopped counting. And you're looking at this and say, you know what's going on? They're holding out votes. Because previously you're looking at the eastern states. I mean, Florida came in really well, and it came in early, as always, and that was good. And Georgia was coming in consistently where we're holding a lead. And we knew that most of the voters had voted early in Georgia. And from the internal tracking and targeting in the campaign and the internal polling, we knew we had a lead in Georgia, and we knew we were going to lead, and they kept counting. But they weren't calling it. They were just holding it. And then same thing in North Carolina. In Virginia, we were close for a while. We were ahead in Virginia. So those states count early. And then you're looking at Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and you know they're holding something out. We've been here before, and it's like, okay. Literally, when they stopped counting Arizona and Nevada, I'm like, something's up. They were going into shock. They didn't want to believe it. They didn't want to believe that some late surge in Philadelphia could help them win Pennsylvania, or some box of ballots that they'll find in Fulton County again would help them win. It was past that.
And I have to say, by the way, because my younger daughter, Jackie, and her husband, Jimmy, went down to the vote counting center in Fulton County, and the election reforms had worked. They'd cleaned the whole thing up. They said it was just a very clean, very straightforward evening of the way it ought to be. So that was a huge change from 2020.
And that was an important change. And credit has to go to the late speaker, David Ralston. After what happened in 2020, they were embarrassed by it. And he had a bill put in where you were going to have voter ID, whether you voted early in person, whether you voted by drop box, whether you sent in an absentee, you needed ID, and whether you voted on election day, you needed. So voter ID was going to be uniform throughout Georgia. And without any substance and with only malice, they were attacking it as a racist law. They remember Biden called it racist, Jim Crow, and they forced Major League Baseball to take away the All-Star game from Georgia. Fortunately for Braves fans, they won the World Series that year. But Speaker Ralston, Governor Kemp, they stuck by their guns. They stuck by their principles, and they got voter ID passed. And you saw it when Governor Kemp got reelected in the midterm and when Donald Trump won this election. No one is saying that the election was done improperly, that somebody's civil rights were denied or anything like that. In the midterm, when Herschel Walker lost and when Governor Kemp got reelected, Stacey Abrams wasn't complaining there was something unfair about the election. This year in Georgia, win or lose, but fortunately we won. Donald Trump willed that election. And as you said, the law worked perfectly. I mean, voter ID is something that every state should have. The country's too big not to do it.
I also thought that Trump's decision to do things like Madison Square Garden and to be in New York several times, in terms of getting to the 51%, one of the big changes is these blue states where he's cutting the margin in half. He's not carrying them, but he's increasing the possibility of having a national majority. And in New York City, Harris had a 37-point margin, which sounds great, except Biden had a 53-point margin and Hillary had a 62-point margin. So just cutting it down from 53 to 37, Trump was up 21 points in the Bronx, 20 points in Queens, 11 points in Brooklyn. I mean, all of that added up to us having a national majority, which I think, as long as you win the Electoral College, if you can also then win a national majority, your authority to govern goes up dramatically.
Absolutely. And a lot of people were coming from New York and Donald Trump. The first survey he did in 2016, statewide after he secured the nomination, was New York. He wanted to win New York. It was his home state back then. And speaking at the Garden, over a year ago before he did it, he was talking about having a rally at the Garden, because I've heard a statistic he had over 900 rallies in his political career. No one's ever done that. And it's a great organizing tool. You get everybody's cell phones and you get their emails, and if they want to go to these things, it's a great organizing tool for your activists, but you can fill these places. But he was talking about having it at the Garden, and you can see Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles, when he would talk about them being the managers, know they'd have to pay for it. And it wasn't a battleground state. 10 presidents have spoken there, I think 14 times.
We pulled that up and then gave it to the team when they started talking about the 1939 Nazi rally. People forgot. Bill Clinton was nominated at Madison Square Garden. And I think it was that kind of absurdity that ultimately undercut Harris's chance to be taken seriously.
Yes, and Jimmy Carter was nominated there, and it was like George W. Bush after 9/11. What they were missing was Donald Trump was talking about issues and talking about policies. He was talking about his performance. Because what we saw in the surveys was President Trump had net positive ratings. When you asked, did you approve or disapprove of his job ratings in the battleground states, they approved 51-48. But then if you asked, do you approve or disapprove of the job that Joe Biden had, he had like a 59% disapproval. And Kamala Harris was 43 approved, 53 disapproved. So the majority disapproved of the job, and this was true in the national polls, the majority disapproved of the job that Biden and Harris were doing. So every vote we could get was in that disapproval. And it was a matter of just running a contrast campaign on the issues, as a character contrast, that as president, he would do a better job on inflation and grow the economy. He would do a better job on taxes. He would do a better job on crime, on securing the border, on national security. And that kind of focus was good. But the Democrats, in the end, their message came down to political character assassination. As you mentioned, calling him a fascist, calling him a Nazi, going after him as unhinged, and it was all personality based.
Do you think dumping Biden was a mistake?
Yeah, I think it was a mistake. It was a mistake on two levels, because the real problem was their policies were failing. Inflation was still high. Supermarket prices hadn't gone down. People's rents were going up. It cost significantly more to buy a used car or a new car. Mortgage rates, your payment that the average person would make on a home had doubled since Trump was president. Their problem was they didn't fix the policies. So he was perceived as more of a moderate centrist Democrat, but his policies went left and they failed. So inflation was high, government spending was too much, taxes were still high, America was weak in the world, the border was wide open, so crime was going up, fentanyl coming over. So instead of trying to moderate like Bill Clinton did, and you had a front row seat at this, when Clinton realized he had to get reelected after you wiped him out in 94, what did he do? He put in workfare. He had a capital gains tax cut. He moderated him.
One of the side effects this year is the Republicans getting the control of the Senate back. And it strikes me that that's a huge deal in terms of getting nominees through and getting all sorts of stuff scheduled that the Democrats would have fought every day to try to stop. How much of the picking up the Senate do you think was a side effect of Trump?
Trump was a foundation they could all stand on. There was very little ticket splitting that you'd see there. So when Trump was all of a sudden about a month out, when they said it was Democrats leaking the polls, you had Tammy Baldwin leaking polls saying that Trump was ahead in Wisconsin, and you had Slotkin, the Democrat in Michigan, saying that Trump was ahead there. The panic was raging. And Bob Casey, my brother Jim did polling for Dave McCormick, all of a sudden Casey's running ads that he supported Trump on different things, tariffs or whatever. And you're like, I guess those polls are right. It was very similar to Reagan in 80. When Reagan got 50% of the vote nationally, he also had 55 Senate seats because he picked up a number of Senate seats in that year. And there were radical Democrats being voted out. It was like history repeating himself. Somebody like Bob Casey, who appears to have lost in Pennsylvania, that could get us to 53 seats. I think there's a possibility that only 75% is counted in Arizona right now. And Kari Lake seems to be closing that margin significantly. So maybe she could come through because Trump won Arizona decisively, where he's won it by 5 points. If you're voting for Trump, he's raising the foundation for all these Senate candidates. And it basically has delivered a Republican Senate majority, which goes into your long-term vision about this is not just one election, one presidential election. This is about creating a new governing coalition where the country needs to be turned around, needs to be reformed, needs a lot of reform in its institutions and the way the government serves in a 21st century compared to a 20th century government. If the Republicans, if they have a majority like that in the Senate, and Trump made a lot of policy proposals during the campaign, he did them on video, he put them out. His platform that you helped him with, it was shorter, but there was very specific proposals in there. And if he can implement those things that the majority of voters agree with, we could have a good midterm election and defy history again.
I think historians are going to look back and think that Elon Musk emerging as a figure in government, if he applies that kind of visionary rethinking to the federal government, we may have a dramatically better and remarkably cheaper government in 3 or 4 years. Maybe one of those transformational moments when we look back and go, wow, how did that happen? When I look at the people he's surrounding himself with, there is dramatically more talent than there was in 2016. Partly because he's been president, he's been around a long time, but partially because he's gotten better, I think, at looking for entrepreneurial personalities that could actually change things. Somebody like Vivek, for example, who may run for governor of Ohio, but if he's willing to, he would be a transformational cabinet officer. Just his drive, his energy, his entrepreneurship, he could take one of the major departments and dramatically improve it.
Yes. When you think about it, Trump succeeds by surrounding himself with talented people and then taking credit for what they do. But that's leadership. Internally in the campaign, we were asking during the primary, do you think Donald Trump would be a better president than his last term, the same, about the same, or worse? And the number of voters, if the majority said, as we built a majority who said he'll be a better president, as he would put out policy ideas, he would put out vision, his votes in the primary solidified and his leads got bigger. We were asking in the general, Tony Fabrizio and I, we kept it, something I suggested to Tony, and when we kept that, we could break 50%. That Trump, even though when the polls were showing us we were under 50% nationally, or they were showing us that we might not be ahead in the battleground states, his job approval was a leading indicator, and the perception that he'd be a better president was a leading indicator, which is why the Democrats kept trying to get us off those topics and bring us back to some sort of personal character fight.
I think at the same time, as part of that, I noticed every time you'd say, here are the undecideds, and you'd look at what were their underlying characteristics, they were about 2-1 in favor of Trump. And I kept thinking, wait a second, if they agree with him on everything, when they're finally forced to decide by the calendar, and they can't hide anymore, that they're going to break, and they did. I mean, people thought they were going to break for Harris. How much do you think her utter total incompetence weakened that campaign?
Ultimately, it was flawed because of that. And that was the thing about should Biden pull out or not, because she was as responsible for him as the bad policies. And what was amazing, what we witnessed was, here you had somebody who basically had never won a primary, never won a caucus, and she was handpicked by Biden when he stepped aside to be the nominee. And the way they forced her out, think about our monthly national poll that we released at the end of June, Trump was ahead by 2. And then Trump debates Joe Biden. Joe Biden comes off as too old, but also he's wrong on a lot of policies. The media manufactures a bunch of polls to force him to step aside. The actor Clooney's sending out a letter saying he needs to step aside. So the liberal elites are dumping the guy, forcing him out with the liberal media. And then Trump has first of all, he survives an assassin's bullet by the grace of God. He then has a great convention in Milwaukee. Party's totally united. And Joe Biden gets out that Sunday and he handpicks Kamala Harris. And she had double-digit negatives already. She was this incompetent vice president. And all of a sudden, the media remakes her into this change, and we're going to turn the page, and she's going to be all this. And our friend Brent Bozell, who's doing the media research studies, she's getting over 90% positive press, and Trump is getting over 90% negative press in the studies. And you give a negative press to a guy who was nearly killed. So her incompetence that people had to focus on before Biden got out and before the transformation began was totally overlooked and fabricated. And they were trying to run some sort of like European style snap election after they remade her. It was flawed because it wasn't too short of time. There was enough time that people would look at her and say she's really not qualified. And she never did, by the way, she never did a full press conference during the whole campaign. She did over 100 days without doing a press conference, and she was running for president. The media was fine with that. And the only debate they did, fortunately, was done early enough because it was 3-on-1. They had the fact checks for Trump written already by the time he's going in. And it's like, did the Harris campaign write these?
In an alternative universe, if we had had a neutral press that had not suppressed Trump and pumped her up, what do you think the outcome would have been?
I think Trump would have won by even more. Maybe 55 to 60% of the vote was in reach.
Because it occurred to me that one of the things that neither Nixon nor Reagan had was the scale of media dishonesty. Let me ask you two other things. One, I want to go back to Arizona because I was really surprised that the county that Phoenix is in is actually a Republican county.
Maricopa, yeah.
So why is it a problem? I mean, or do they not vote functionally Republican?
It's a suburban swing county. So what happens, it can come out from under you. There's a lot of John McCain voters still out there. I think it became more Trump country because of the open border. Although they're removed from the border, they're getting a lot of people there, the effects from the open border. And the governor who was elected there, she got elected as a Soros Secretary of State when the Soros nonprofits were helping her. And then she became the governor in a close race against Kerry Lake in the midterms. You know, I think the problems are that Soros came up with that strategy to control the elections. The district attorneys control the Secretary of States who control the election. And it really hurt us in 2020. I mean, it absolutely hurt us in 2020 badly. I think you're seeing more of Arizona go back to its more traditional Republican history because they're so impacted by the border. And, you know, they do have a history of moderate Democrats getting elected in the state. And Kelly tries to portray himself as a moderate, but they haven't voted moderate. But it's a battleground. Maricopa is a suburban county where you have a lot of swing voters. You have some more people that have moved there from California, fleeing California. It seems appropriate, like it's right between Texas and California, and that's where it meets. A lot of the Hispanic voters that are there are legal, became citizens. You've done focus groups of those voters out there with us where
they are really anti-illegal.
Right.
Because they paid their dues and they don't want Arizona to turn into Mexico.
Right. I think 4 years ago during COVID, we had that problem. It was just a bad confluence of things going on there that we barely lost the state. But it appears to Donald Trump's hard work and the message and the issues that resonated, and we've won decisively there this time.
One other thing, it looks as of now like the House Republicans will keep control, which is, I think, really important because I have a hunch the Democrats would have moved either to block Trump from being sworn in or to impeach him as soon as he was sworn in. What's your take on the whole nature of the House races?
By the way, I shared your view of this where, if they'd gotten a majority, they would have done something where they wouldn't have certified or they would have said we were an insurrectionist. They would actively be trying to delegitimize.
That's where the 51% kills them. If he'd been at 48 or 49, that's one thing. But when you walk in the door and you're at 51% support, it's almost impossible to stop you.
This time around, we ran more aggressive campaigns, but the bad part is we had people sitting in races they'd won in the midterm, and the increased turnout was going to hurt us. Like two of the incumbents that we lost was Brandon Williams up in Syracuse, New York, where Brandon saw a surge of college voting in his district. And he lost because you had college students coming out voting against Trump, voting for Harris. And then you had Anthony D'Esposito, who'd been elected in a district, New York 4 and Nassau County, Biden had won the district by 16 points. By the way, the Democrats, even though we had won the redistricting lawsuit 2 years ago in 22, and a judge drew the fairer competitive districts, they came back, rejiggered the Court of Appeals in New York, which is the highest court, to get a new redistricting plan to rejigger Anthony's district and Williams's district to put in more Democrats there precisely so that they could get an outcome and win a close race. And in both those races, like the Esposito's district, Biden had won it by 16 points. Trump won it this time, which is amazing. So Nassau County and Swazi almost lost his race to somebody that nobody targeted. You know, he wasn't given any outside help, Michael Petrie, but there was a huge suburban surge of voters where Trump had lost Nassau County by 10 points in 2020 to Biden. And this time around, it appears that Trump's won the county by like 30,000 votes. So it's a big turnaround. But Trump was the one that was leading the ticket and he was bringing in most votes. But the Democrats were able to spend more than most Republicans.
John, I want to thank you for joining me. I want to say right now, I hope sometime next year we can do this focusing forward on the off-year election, which I think will be one of the critical turning points of whether or not this is a temporary move or the beginning of a new governing majority. Just want to say for the record, it is tremendous to work with you and your team. I mean, you guys are so smart. You know the country so thoroughly, and you've been so innovative in working with Joe DeSantis and me that I look forward to continuing that relationship. It's going to be an unbelievable 4 years ahead. You're going to be right in the middle of all of it. And I appreciate you sharing with Newt's World and all of our listeners your remarkable knowledge of the country. And I really thank you for taking the time to be with me.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I got to tell you, it's an honor and privilege to work for you and to see your strategy actually formulate and then go into work with Joe DeSantis. Deserves a lot of credit. He's very smart. Your whole team is very smart. I love the way you look at the public opinion and figure out, okay, if we do this, the American people will respond and we can take them in the right direction and hopefully make people's lives better and do good things for the country. So it's an honor and privilege to work for you, and it's an honor and privilege to be here.
Thank you to my guest, John McLaughlin. You can learn more about the election outcome on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.